Okay, folks. If you all want to go ahead and take your seats, we'll go ahead and get started. Well, I want to thank everyone for coming out tonight. My name is Jason Woods. I'm your host and meetup organizer. I'm a staff software engineer for American Specialty Health. But before we get started, I would like to turn the time over to Cami from Find Great People. She and Find Great People are our sponsor tonight. They sponsor all our events, and we really appreciate all that they do for us. Here you are, Cami.
All right, well, great to see a lot of new faces today, and a lot more people than I think we expected, so sorry about the pizza shortage, but yeah, we really appreciate you guys coming out, and I know we're working very hard to make sure that the conflicting schedules are resolved soon, so I know that will help too. But for those of you that don't know me, I'm Cami Raybould with Find Great People. I'm an IT recruiter here. Our office is actually right outside of downtown, but we get the opportunity to work with clients all over Columbia, South Carolina, and even the nation too, and get to work any positions from IT support all the way up through management, director level, and everywhere that IT splits off from there. So definitely a pleasure being here, and I'll most likely be kind of the point of contact at these meetings from here on out. So don't hesitate to grab a card in the back or shoot me a LinkedIn, and would love to chat and be a resource if I can be.
Thank you. Thank you, Cami. Yeah. We really appreciate all that Find Great People does for us. I want to introduce Elizabeth Gibbs. She's wearer of many hats for American Specialty Health here in the Columbia office. And turn the time over to you.
All right. Thanks, Jason. So I've met most of y'all, but if I haven't, I'm Elizabeth Gibbs. I'm the Human Resources Office Manager and Engagement Partner, longest title in history, for the Columbia location. So like Jason said, I wear many hats. I'm also part of the talent acquisition team, so I support with hiring for this office, running the office, making sure that everyone's happy and well-fed as much as possible. We are hiring, so if you are at all interested, I can't stick around too long tonight, but I've left some cards up here, so if you wanted to shoot me a message or connect with me on LinkedIn. We are a .NET shop, so we're looking for, actually we have about 8 positions open right now. We are expanding. We're looking to add another team to this office. So we're looking for software engineers and test, front-end developers, and UX designers. So if you're interested at all, you'd like to know more, or maybe you know someone who's looking, take a look at our careers page on ashcompanies.com/careers and take a look at the positions, or talk to one of us. We're happy to share with you a little bit more about what we do, what we're looking for. We have several Ash employees in the audience tonight, so Jason and Andrew and a bunch of others. So if you have questions at all and would like to know more, then talk to us. We're happy to have you. Thanks.
All right, so tonight we have another Ash software engineer presenting. Andrew Gibson, he's one of our senior engineers, and obviously he's going to be talking about Blazor and WebAssembly. So without further ado, we'll turn it over to you, Andrew.
All right, thanks, Jason. All right, well, out here and taking your time after your busy schedule to hear me ramble about Blazor and WebAssembly. Just a quick poll here. Who's heard of WebAssembly and Blazor? Anybody done any research into it yet? Installed it? All right, you can probably come up here and join me on this. So it's a really interesting product, a platform, I guess, but it's got a lot of potential. I'm excited to present this to you guys tonight. This is my first time doing this, so don't be shocked if I say something wrong or do something wrong, but let's see what we can kind of dig in and explore. All right, so Blazor and WebAssembly, a peek into the future. This is kind of some things that we'll go over tonight. What is WebAssembly? We'll give a brief introduction into WebAssembly. Same as Blazor, we'll give a brief introduction into that. And then we'll dig into the code, have a look at that, and wrap up after the demo. So what is WebAssembly? WebAssembly, also known as WASM, WebAssembly is an open standard. It was developed by a guy in Mozilla back in 2015 and became adopted in 4 major browsers 2 years later in 2017. So it was first adopted, obviously, in Mozilla first, then Edge, or IE, I believe. Well, I think IE, but Safari and Chrome. Okay. It has the ability to execute compiled code directly within many common browsers. All right, so what the goal and the purpose of WebAssembly is to get compiled code such as C, C++, and get that to run inside the browser as close to the machine as possible. So it's running at kind of near native speeds. All right. So it uses a low-level assembly compilation language to achieve near native speeds. It doesn't do any kind of transpiling into any other languages that gets run in the IL. This will actually compile into files that are basically assembly language, and those will run very close to the native speeds on your computer. All right, so it executes securely as a virtual runtime within the browser sandbox. So yeah, when these files are compiled, they're served through the browser. That gets run under the WASM engine, which is basically a secure sandbox, just like the DOM is running JavaScript in, right? You can't do anything crazy with running these DLLs in the browser that you would be able to do with JavaScript. You're not going to get access to the user's computer system and be able to start formatting hard drives and the works, right? It's lightweight, designed for portability. So again, because that you're taking a lot of that transplant out and whatnot, one of the big focuses with WebAssembly is that the bits are very small. They're compressed, so they're downloaded very quickly, and they are executed very swiftly. It was not invented with the intent to replace UI developers. So a quick disclaimer with this presentation is that there's some controversy that floats out there. You know, some UI developers, I don't know here who might be full stack, who kind of works in all tiers of the stack, but there's some kind of prodding across the disciplines and whatnot about, you know, well, is this going to replace JavaScript? Is this going to replace Angular and stuff like that? It is meant to be a tool, and we'll get more into that later on as well. But my presentation here is not to give an argument to say, you know, use Blazor, use WebAssembly in place of. All right, this is something to show, to give you some information about, and to use it in a practical way that might help solve some problems that you're facing. Okay. And so similar to that, playing on to that point, it does not replace JavaScript, but interops with JavaScript. All right. So actually, and what we'll kind of look at too is running some of those WASM files and whatnot. They have to still communicate with JavaScript. They can still work with other JavaScript files. You can mix those in certain ways. So it's not a complete, you can run in WebAssembly without JavaScript, so to speak, but it's not intended to be a force that counters JavaScript. All right, so just kind of, just to give you guys, well, that didn't work too well. All right, so this is a chart just showing the various compatibility of WebAssembly. And again, we're talking about WebAssembly here, not Blazor yet. Okay, so this is the core, the engine, so to speak. This is the box that Blazor will run inside of within the browser. Okay, so WebAssembly is the open standard. Blazor is not, right? So that's why we're trying to kind of show what the potential is here. So this compatibility chart, I know it's hard to read because it's pretty small. I apologize for that, but what I was trying to show with this is these are different features that are part of WebAssembly, different capabilities you can do within that, that framework. These are your browsers that it's compatible with. So you had the 4 major ones, and now you can see each of these columns here is a different type of browser in one way or another. So you have all the mobile browsers, Samsung, Android, Chrome, Firefox for Android, even Opera, Safari. Internet Explorer looks like it's not really compatible with, but that's because it is compatible with Edge. with certain versions as well. And there are certain versions that you can do more stuff with WebAssembly than other versions of those browsers. So in 2017, it was adopted with 4 different, the 4 major browsers, right? Now you can see here in 2019, 2 years later, you have a wide breadth of compatibility. So this is very popular. It is getting adopted. So it is a trend that we should be looking out for. This is something that is growing exponentially in popularity. Blazor is Microsoft's solution for WebAssembly. There are other solutions out there as well. There are other languages that you can run, C, C++, Rust. So any of those languages that you might be familiar with, you would also have the capability to run in WebAssembly. All right, so that's just a high-level introduction of WebAssembly. Okay, there's a lot of information out there. I encourage you to go see it. I just wanted to kind of give a brief introduction of what we're looking at. Blazor. So the name Blazor is kind of one of the first things that pops up when you start looking it up. But the name basically is spawned from browser and razor. Okay, so the L is whatever, Louis. Who knows what L is, right? It sounds cooler to say Blazor instead of Brasor. That was a nice topic we had earlier. So, so yeah, browser plus razor. That's the name that spawned Blazor. It is Microsoft's full stack SPA framework. So this is their single page application framework that they wanted to build off of. All right, Blazor allows the .NET runtime to run inside the browser under the WebAssembly engine. And we've got a couple pictures coming up here real quickly, but basically you have your browser, you have your WebAssembly sandbox, and Blazor will run off of the mono runtime inside of WebAssembly. Currently, it's compatible with .NET Core version 3, and currently it's not publicly available yet. It's still in preview up until I think 8 days, I think, or something like that, 6 days. So it's slated to go to general availability on September 23rd, unless something changes. But that's when it will be released along with the .NET Core framework. And it is open source. And we'll kind of look at the open source page for this right now, and you'll kind of see the community support behind this. It's growing pretty rapidly. So that's great. You have access to all the source code in the project, and you can help be a part of that. All right, so Blazor server-side. So there's a few different types of Blazor that you can work with. And what we'll talk about here in a little bit is what will be available in the current release. Well, actually, I'll just say it now. So Blazor server-side is the main project type within the Blazor framework, if you will, that will be released on September 23rd. There's Blazor client-side, and there's Blazor client-side with Asp Net hosting. And we'll go through each of those project types as well. But Blazor server-side is the one that is actually going to be released in September. This communicates, oh, and you'll see that I put not Razor components. All right, so when I was doing my research for this presentation, I was seeing Razor components put all over the place. I was seeing it as, well, those are the view files inside the project, and we'll go over that as well. And I was also seeing it as, well, the project was also referred to as Razor components for Blazor server-side. Well, I don't know how many of you have dug into some of the documentation out there surrounding Blazor, but is constantly updating, especially since it's in preview. So they're changing things. And basically what they were doing is they tried to run with the concept of Razor components as the views, but then they thought it would be good to call this project Razor components as well. Like myself included, spawned a whole bunch of conversation and wasted time trying to figure out what is it supposed to be called. So eventually I found a couple bits of information from some sources that said it was a bad idea, so they scratched the Razor components as the project name, which makes sense. And you'll see that when we come into the project. So now it's just called Blazor server-side. All right, so this communicates over the wire using WebSocket connection. Or for this case, that is SignalR's framework or runtime. No runtime files are downloaded into the browser. So we'll come back to this one as well. You'll kind of see how this works. But you'll see over here to the bottom right corner, this kind of gives us an idea, and this came from their documentation website. I thought this was a really great picture. All right, so you have your browser, you have the DOM. So it basically pulls down the JavaScript files necessary that can interface with your backend, right? So all your runtime files for this Blazor server side will be in the backend hosted on some ASP.NET Core server. All right, and then those will run using your Razor components off of the .NET framework, which will be compiled and run over Mono still. All types, I believe, are run over Mono. And then you can see that your connection between your client and your server, in this case, is going to be Signal R. There are other options. What you'll also notice here is that it does open up that WebSocket connection. You can still also make other API calls using HTTP requests or other protocols as well. So you're not just limited to that, but that's their baseline for ensuring the communication and the behavior of that SPA. Okay. All right. Responses are compared and changes applied within the browser. All right. So when your client makes a request to the server to get information over that WebSocket connection, the framework itself will check the response and compare that, and will only update the areas that it needs to update. Similar to any other SPA framework you would see out there. It's a very similar concept. All right, and with Blazor server-side, the one, well, I shouldn't say the one, but one key bonus to that is that you have access to the full .NET runtime, whereas if you were running Blazor client-side, what you'll see here shortly is that it doesn't pull down the entire runtime, obviously, because that would be massive, right? It just wouldn't be feasible. It's only going to pull down the necessary bits it needs to execute the runtime that it needs within the browser. So in this case, if you have some very heavy .NET features or even non-.NET features that may be required from the server side, this is a good opportunity or a good case to use that. Okay. So Blazor client side. All right. This one is the .NET runtime code is converted to WebAssembly syntax. It is static type runtime and no JavaScript translation is needed. So this will compile everything it needs, bundle it, pull that down into the browser, run that within that WASM sandbox that we were talking about. The binaries are small, so similar to this. I didn't actually do any kind of benchmarking tests for this demo or whatnot, or speed tests. I do know that just behaviorally it was very efficient and fast, but the binaries are small. The documentation shows that it's around, I think, 800 megs or something like that, and they want to get that down to like half a meg. So they're still continuing to work on the optimization of that, and those are going to be some key features you're going to see that even after the initial release, they'll still be working on trying to compress those binaries even smaller and remove some of the bloat that may not be needed. All right. But even with it in its current state, it is very quick. And comparing it to other SPAs, sometimes, especially with that initial load, there's a little bit of that lag, right, to get all the necessary data it needs to run that SPA. With this, and it was a very basic cases that I was running against, but you couldn't even notice it. It was very, very quick. Everything in this project and everything that I tested with was fast, easy to spin up, so that was very nice. All right, secured runtime within the browser, similar to other UI runtimes. So when you're thinking about, hey, my browser can pull down DLLs from a server and execute against those, what's one of the first things that would go through your mind? Right? Security. That would be one thing, like, oh, they're going to be able to inspect the DLLs, they're going to be able to see the guts of the application, they can hack our code and send that back up, do whatever, right? It's as I mentioned earlier, it's just as secure. It still runs within the container of that browser. Anything that is pulled down, regardless of the file type, isn't going to have any additional access that you would be able to do, say, through JavaScript, right? JavaScript in the DOM has a container within the browser that it has to run in. This is very similar. It runs on a VM instance inside the browser, and it is contained to that. It doesn't have access to anything else. And likewise, security-wise, as I'll show you guys here shortly, you can inspect the DLLs within the browser, and you can actually debug them for this case. But similar to JavaScript, if you have some secure code that you don't want people looking at, you're not going to put it in a JavaScript file to begin with, right? So it's a similar concept with the DLLs as well. You're only going to build, compile, and ship out whatever is acceptable for users to see. All right, interoperability with JavaScript, so similar. It still plays with the DOM. It can still connect with JavaScript. And actually, in many of these cases, it will still use JavaScript files to kind of use as the means to interface and work through the DOM in order to execute the behavior of the SPA. Okay, and portable for hosting on any server. So again, this is built and compiled and executed over the Mono runtime. So Mono is cross-platform. So anywhere where you can run Mono, you would be able to run one of these websites as well. So you're not constrained to a .NET server that has the .NET framework installed, right? You can run this on any server. All right, so that's all I have for the introductions for Blazor and WebAssembly. So now we're going to go and kind of play around with the code a little bit. All right, so I'm going to open up, oh, actually, before we do that, so I was going to mention a couple interesting pieces of documentation that I found helpful. There's obviously the Blazor.net site, which is this, very straightforward, some clear information on it. Most of you may have already seen the site, but it's a good place to get started. Obviously, got the big button, get started. But that'll show you what to download. There's a couple gotchas with this, is that this has been out for, I think, since 2017, late 2017, I believe, is when they started releasing the first preview of Blazor. But so it came out with .NET Core 2 point something, 2.5, I want to say. But some of the documentation suggested you could use that along with like Visual Studio 2017 and whatnot. This documentation states use Preview 9, .NET Core 3, Visual Studio 2019. I tried to play around with it, see if I could get it to work anyway, because I wanted to try to be smarter than them, and I wasn't. So I just did what I was told. And after that, it worked fine. But some good information on there. They have the documentation, the reference to all the Blazor framework as well. This one is this is the initial repo for Blazor, but you can see here, the reason why I wanted to call this out is it tells you that it's moved into the .NET Core repo. So this is fully integrated into ASP.NET Core or .NET Core. So once you get that, you will automatically have all the Blazor features that you need. Okay? All right, so and then this lastly for resources, this was kind of one of my favorite sites. This is a GitHub repo by Adrian Torres. He's got this repo called Awesome Blazor. And you'll notice here a large list of contents, right? He's got pretty much everything in here. So this was a single source area to go to find some really good information. He's got some good tutorials. He's got some sample projects here. He's got all types. One popular area with WASM is gaming, obviously, and actually Unity is also using some form of WASM. Don't quote me on how much or to what extent, but I do know that they are also interested in WASM and using it for their platform. So different types of projects here that you can play with. They also have this little pizza one here, so you'll see this blazing pizza. So Dan Ross did a presentation at I think Microsoft Build a year ago or so, and it was a really cool presentation, gave some really good insight into how to structure a project and use it from across the full stack. And he used this demo for his presentation. So something really cool to look at, and watch that video on YouTube. Again, that was Dan Roth, but some good information in here. Okay, so I've rambled on enough. Let's go look at some stuff. And I don't know where I see a hidden Visual Studio window there, so I'm trying to figure out what that is. Oh, there it is. It was right in front of me. Okay, so first thing, I just want to walk you guys through the basic templates, the scaffolding that you get with Blazor out of the box. So we're going to inspect those a little bit, and then we'll try to write a little app after that. So, oh, actually, before I do that, I'm going to show you guys a couple gotchas. So let's see here if I can find the one. So you'll see this Blazor app. This is the only option you'll see. I mentioned to you guys 3 different types, project types that you have access to, right? There's only this one single option here. You click next. Let's see, let me change my demo location because I'm finicky. All right, so we're going to call this Blazor app 1. We're going to hit create. And then here's where you'll get to be able to select your different project types. Okay, so you'll see there's 2 options. I had mentioned 3 earlier. I actually didn't talk about the 3rd one though, now that I think about it. So Blazor Server App, the first one. This is the one I had mentioned to you guys where this runs completely in the, at the server side. This doesn't get pulled down into the browser running under the WASM sandbox. There's Webassembly App here, which this is the client-side version. Now, a few weeks ago when I was kind of tinkering around with this, these names were totally different, and I was seeing different options, and then it changed. So I had reinstalled some templates, and I'll show you guys that here in a second. But just know, I think, in the early phases of that, be anticipating some changes in this stuff, because I was coming here scratching my head for a few hours going, okay, what happened now? Did I lose my SDK? Like, so it's throwing me for a loop, and I guess I should have known better. The 3rd project template that I wanted to show is this piece right here. So you have this Asp.NET Core Hosted. All right. So firstly, though, what we're going to do is we're just going to kind of go down the list here. All right. So you'll see you have a couple different configuration options for these templates. You got configure over HTTPS. Yes, we're going to check that. It's by default. Why not? Enable Docker support. We're not going to do that for the sake of this demo. But it's pretty cool that you get that integrated in, and then this no authentication. So for the sake of time, we're just going to do this so I can kind of show you some kind of cool tips on how they kind of plug this in for you already. You have 2 options. You can connect to an existing store in the cloud. You can store the user accounts in it. And this is the Azure cloud. I don't believe you can do this with other ones, but I could be wrong. But I know with Azure, at least, that's essentially what that was intended for, to my knowledge. Store user accounts in app. We're just going to do this as an in-memory identity server, and it's going to use basically Entity Framework to spin that up for us. Okay? So we select. Oh, yeah, sorry. Like I said, I'm new to this, so I'm not used to hitting all these commands. And darn it, it is still too big. Oh, there we go. Okay. Oh, actually, so this is something I also wanted to bring up. This is one of the gotchas. So I was seeing this, and I was seeing changes in my project templates, and it was kind of throwing me for a loop. And I got this warning message here that said the .NET SDK is installed in multiple locations. So by habit, I'm used to usually installing 32-bit installs for the most part, but eventually I installed the 64-bit, and it started working again. Somehow I had uninstalled it. Had a bunch of fun getting that set up originally, but you'll see this whenever you've installed the 32-bit version of .NET Core 3.0 and the 64-bit version. So not a big deal. Everything works. I just wanted to kind of call out that, that warning. So, okay. So we're going to hit create. Yeah.
I was just curious, like, how is the server Blazor any different than like another server type application?
Yeah, in my opinion, it's not to an extent.
That's what I was thinking, because it
Yeah.
doesn't sound any different than any,
The difference is in the behavior of it, right? Because with the Blazor server side, what it's doing is it's still an SPA app. So it still runs the .NET framework over ASP.NET Core. It's hosted on a server. And what you'll kind of see here in a second is it will pull down JavaScript files, whatnot. It's an SPA implementation that's scaffolded for you. That doesn't require you to have to go pull in other JS frameworks, Angular, React, stuff like that. So out the box, you can use this.
SPA, you mean single page, right?
Yeah, single page application, sorry, yes. So, so yeah, that's the intent, is that it's very efficient. And again, this is what's getting released in next week. But, and we'll probably go over some of the differences. What I like with this is that kind of the benefit is you get that SPA behavior, and you're still working as a C# developer. You're not working as a JavaScript developer And now, again, my disclaimer is not to discredit UI, right? But and what you'll see in this demo that we're going to do here in a little bit, assuming I don't keep rambling and run out of time, is it's butt ugly. It's a horribly ugly. You know, it looks like a back end built a website, right? So that's what we're going to see. Yeah.
Next time there's questions, can you repeat it in the live stream? People are asking.
Yep, will do. Sorry about that. All right, so and actually the question was, what's the difference between using Blazor server-side versus any other server-side website like MVC or anything like that. Any other questions before I move on? And feel free to stop me at any point in time. Sorry, I'll keep going if not. All right, so real quickly, we're going to just have a quick look here. So you'll see here's your Razor files. These are .razor, they're not .cshtml. So these are actually Razor components. These are what we can officially call a Razor component at this point, okay? So we look at these, a couple quick things just to note. You'll see here's this router node here that allows you to do some customizations for the behavior of your site. It lets you kind of define here semi 404 message so you can handle unmapped routes. And this one is actually pertaining to authentication, right? But you have some configurability here in some of these classes. You have your startup file, which this is actually, you know, .NET Core 3 type feature, but what we'll see here is nothing too exceptional. Come on, mouse, work. Well, I don't know what I just did there. Well, anyway, so you can see here, this kind of where you just wire up all your different dependencies and whatnot. So if you want to use authentication authorization, you can see here, this wires those up, right? And dependency injection is very big in this project. So we'll see that also here in a minute. You've got your imports file. Again, this is a Razor component. So this does your global imports for all of your views. We have you've got some shared Razor View components here. So if we look at the main nav, you'll see here this is where it renders the body. This is pretty clean Razor syntax out the box, right? You have your inherit here where you would define essentially like your model or base class that would drive the behavior of these sites. You'll notice here's your login display control out the box. All right, so not much syntax. It's pretty clean. You have your main nav or your navigation section here also has some nav links. So they've got some custom components there that you can plug in very quickly and efficiently, okay? So looking at this example here, you'll also notice there's a code section. Now, looking at your documentation, one of the gotchas, again, is certain documentations will have at functions. And you'll see here we have at code. So at functions is the older way of doing it in some of the earlier preview versions. Now in preview 9, and maybe a version behind, I don't know, but they've renamed that to at code, or using this code block. So if you see any documentation or examples where it has at functions, just know you can easily replace that with at code for a newer version of the framework. And in the GA version, you would use at code. All right, so our pages. So we'll see here we've got our counter page. Again, there's a code section that that controls the C# behavior. We have a button here where we can increment the count. And here, this app page here, this directive, this is our routing, okay? So I can do this, and I can actually do multiple routing as well. Yeah.
Does the at code block, does that run server-side or client-side?
Both.
Oh.
Depends on what project. So it runs technically. What's that? Oh, sorry. Yes. So the question is this at code block here. Does this run server-side or client-side? So if you run it using the server-side project, and we can actually look at this here in a minute, but you won't see this. This will actually run server-side. With the client-side projects, and we'll go through some debugging, you should be able to step into these. So we'll have a look at that. Okay, so we'll just save that real quick and we'll come back to that. We got this host file here, and we have some various things in here. Now this is kind of key here. So this render component async, again, this is the server-side one. So the key difference, what you're going to see between the other two templates that we'll look at, is this piece right here. This is actually telling it that I'm going to render making calls, API calls, not API calls, it's still over SignalR, but this is going to tell it to connect back to the server. And you'll see that this will have a different directive here for the other templates as well. And also, if we look at this just to show you, now I don't quite understand yet what the differences are on these because, again, I'm new. But you'll see here there's some definitions on these. There's 3 different versions, renders and markers for Blazor server-side something, right? I tried playing with some of those, and when I switched this enum value in some of my projects, they blew up. So I'm not quite sure, how they work with what you're trying to accomplish, but that is something that you could definitely explore. All right, so we'll put that back. Okay, so, all right, we have our application DB context. This is Entity Framework classes that is scaffolded into the project, and I'll show you guys how these kind of get spun up by default for you. So you have these different snapshots and whatnot for your co-first stuff. All right, and then we have areas here. It's kind of similar to MVC, how there's areas. You have some pages here that are applied to the authentication aspect. Okay, so we'll run this real quick. This is going to spin up an IIS Express instance.
This is a good place to tell us a joke.
Oh, yeah, now you put me on the spot and I can't think of a joke. We're waiting. So we have an IIS Express instance running at this point, and actually, I believe even with the client-side one, it'll still spin up an IIS Express instance also. Okay, so here's our Hello World example. Okay, so we have our counter here. We click. All right, you see it resolves to the same page, right? So we have here. I added a second route called countered. Okay. So very easy, straightforward to control that routing. You can actually control that routing in some classes as well in the app configuration, but out the box, this was the easiest way to do it. Okay, so they got the fetch data here. Now with the server side, what I want to show you guys is, let me close my console. I'm going to clear all of this. Okay, so the initial load to the site is done. All right, and we're going to hit counter. Okay, you see that nothing made any calls back to the server at this point, right? If I hit fetch, and if I click counter, this is all being done in the browser at this point in time. So it's not making any calls back. I go back to fetch data. Oh, it did do that last time. This was making a call. Or I was just seeing things, which is probably not too far off. All right. Yeah, it's still not showing. Oh, am I not picking it up? I might have had it checked before. Well, I had all. Well, anyway. But you can play around with the different interactions you have between the server and the client. If we come look at sources, okay, we've got our Blazor server.js. So this is just some compressed file that allows the API calls to kind of talk back and forth with the DOM, I believe. It has some bootstrap files out the gate with it. And so you'll notice it's not really pulling down any kind of bits at this point in time. All right, I must be thinking about the other project as far as the WASM files go. Okay. All right, so enough with that one. So we'll close that. All right, so let's go check out another project real quick. Okay, so we're going to create another new project. Call it app 2. All right, so now we're going to do the client side. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to do this Blazor Webassembly App, and we're going to create this. Okay, so you'll notice right off the bat the difference in the structures. You do still have some similar files. You still have your startup. It's a lot lighter, as you can see at this point. It just has this one app component, which adds the app or registers the app. Your program files are pretty light. Let's see here. We've got main nav is still very similar. You see you still got your code blocks, and you still got the same Razor structure. All right, so we're going to run this right now. Yeah.
So it's the Blazor server app versus the Blazor WebAssembly app. Those are the two you have, right?
Yeah.
What is one of those more of an SPA than the other, or what's kind of the difference between these two?
So the question is, what's the difference between the server-side app and this in reference to the SPA? They're both still SPA. Both are still live loading responses on the fly. This one is actually going to pull down the bits into the browser. So this one doesn't have any necessary connection to any server. So you could essentially copy this whole project, and you could paste it even on GitHub is one of the examples, and you could run this off of a GitHub site. So you can run this almost anywhere that you can host these files. Other examples are you can put this on the Azure Blob Storage, and you can run this directly off the Blob Storage. It doesn't have to be on any hosted IIS site, for instance. All right, so, and to give you an idea, so if we look at, okay, so here you'll see there's a Blazor WebAssembly JS, and there should be, we have our mono.js as well, right? So those are kind of the two key JS files that kind of package everything together and make sure they run. Now, one thing I haven't quite figured out myself yet, and I'm probably just missing something obvious, I will show you how we can get access to them, is I was expecting here to see all the glory of our Razor views and the DLLs and everything, and I didn't. So the only way I've been able to get that access to those right now is to run this in Debug, and that's what we'll try to walk through right now. There may be another way. I haven't looked into that part of it yet to figure that out. Okay, so similar, you'll see over the network here, there's nothing that's really shown. Let me make sure. Okay, there we go. All right, so everything that we just showed in the sources, we got this mono.wasm, okay? So this is that assembly file. Oh, there it is. That's the part I was looking for. Okay, so the mono.wasm, and here's the bits that we have. So you can see this pulled down everything into the browser, right? So this is completely self-sustained. This can run within itself. Now, again, this is only pulling core features of the .NET Core library that it needs to execute against. This isn't going to pull down the entire framework or anything like that. But you've seen how quick it was to download, right? You look at these files, you get the actual bits. So now let's say we want to debug this. All right, so we're going to close this. Now, here's another gotcha. All right, I closed this, and I had a really frustrating time trying to get this to work. And I was surprised at how little information I had actually found on it. So I have a bad memory. I got to go pull a couple commands. We'll come back to that one, actually. All right, so I got to change my directory path here. And, oh, no, actually, I can go to, where'd my website go? Did I close it? Okay, so let me go into here. All right, let's run this. Okay, there we go. So you'll see here it gives this indication, all right, Shift-Alt-D to run it in Debug. So we come back here. You have to put focus in your browser, not DevTools. Hit Shift-Alt-D, and it'll open up a new tab. Okay, and you'll get this message. Now, don't freak out. This is not a yellow screen of death. This is actually something that is good and helpful to us. So what we're going to do is we're going to just follow directions because I'm not smarter than them. So I'm going to close this, and here's the gotcha. Is if I open up Task Explorer, watch, it'll actually be fine this time. But Chrome, in all its loveliness, opens up a bunch of other processes, right, for all the plugins and stuff that it listens on for performance reasons. So you'll see, let's see here, did I close everything? No, I did not. Who needs a demo? All right. So that's closed, but if we come down here, you see all the Chrome stuff, right? I'm not going to click on each one of those, so I'm just going to go kill all those real quick. All right, before I do that, I don't want to lose my command I just copied. Okay, so there we go. So now I have truly clear. If I don't clear all those out, it actually still isn't going to work. So that's the frustrating part, is that it literally wants you to close every single Chrome process you have open. Hopefully they can make that a little more efficient, but for now, that's the case. So now I'm going to run Chrome in debug mode, and I'm just copy pasting that same command. I already have it in there actually, but this is going to open up Chrome. There we go. Oh, cool, I got a new background. All right, so we can close that. All right, so it opens up that port 15727 for the localhost. All right, so now we should be in debug mode. So if I open up DevTools, okay, we see that same screen, no console errors. That's awesome. All right, let's see, which one is it? Oh, actually, it's okay. So this was another gotcha that I had. It took me quite a while. Like, I went through all the documentation. It told me how to get into debug mode, and it says, hey, my file should be there. But hey, my files are not there, right? The files that we're looking for is, actually I forget the name of it, but I think it's that WASM file. And I had to do this little trick, which really annoyed me that I had to do it, but let me, I don't know where I put the key for it. So it's something like mono, yeah, it's this one. So mono, I think WASM, get load files, this guy. All right, so if I hit this, now previously what it would have done is it showed me this indication here in the console, and it was doing like 3 carets, and then was showing me this like it was trying to execute that command or indicate it should be run. So I hit enter, I get this uncaught exception, which for some reason I'm not too worried about this because for some reason it still worked for me. So I just chalked this up to being in preview mode, right? I mean, it's not my fault. All right, and this is only compatible in Chrome version 70 and above. Okay, is it going to work? It took a while last time. But what we should see is that WASM file show up here in the sources. Let's run it one more time. Come on.
Just for clarification, this is for debugging the Blazor client?
Yeah, this is for debugging the Blazor client, correct. You won't be able to bind into Visual Studio from here. You can maybe attach to a process or something. I haven't actually tried that out yet. But this is just to debug within the browser. And darn it, this was working. So why aren't you working now all of a sudden? Let me try a refresh here. All right. Oh, here we go. OK, so I guess it's finicky, because yesterday I literally had to run that command in order to get them to show up. And that was just yesterday when I was practicing. So let's see here. Well, let's look at one of these files. Show me what I want to see. That's not what I want to see. Where to go? that? It should be in the sources, so I shouldn't be able to click those. Yeah, that's not it. Get rid of my console. So you'll see here's some of that machine language as well, right? But darn it, why isn't that showing me the file I want to see? Come on. Okay, now it's just hung. Let's run this one more time, see if it makes a difference. And I don't know if you guys can see that, but what I was indicating to for that little trick that worked yesterday but isn't working now is this monowasm underscore get underscore load underscore files. All right, maybe we'll come back to this with the other one and see if we can get different result. What? I didn't yesterday. I just called it as that, and it did take a couple minutes or so, but it should have been up by now. It was a WASM file. So, all right. Well, let's come back to this. Let me try shutting this down one more time. Just run this one more time and see what we get. Okay. So. Now, what I will tell you is when I was playing around with debugging, I swear it was working at one time, but there's a lot of limitations to debugging in the browser right now with Blazor. There's a lot that you can't do. I got a few of them listed down here, but what you can do is set and remove breakpoints. You can step through, you can see some certain types in the locals. The main things that you can't do is you can't observe the values of any locals that aren't an int, string, or bool value. You can't observe the values of any class properties or fields. You can't hover over variables to see their values. Evaluate expressions in the console, which that was the frustrating part. I couldn't evaluate the expressions. Step across async calls and perform most other ordinary debugging scenarios. Most other ordinary debugging scenarios, right? So when I was playing around with it, it was still too limited in my opinion. They need to do some more improvements on it, and I know they're planning on it, but the client isn't slated to come out until next year anyway, and there's no due date for that, so however long that'll be. Yeah?
So is this because DevTools has limited ability to debug WebAssembly, or does this let you debug it as .NET code? Why are they having to write their own debugger?
Can you ask that one more time? I'm sorry.
So you're talking about the debugger they have is kind of limited.
Yeah.
Are they having to create their own debugger at Microsoft because DevTools has limited ability to debug this code?
To an extent, and the question is, what is causing the limitations with Blazor? Is it tooling, or are they having to write their own or whatnot? My understanding of it, I couldn't really get a clear example, but I didn't spend a lot of time looking into why either. But I do believe they're using, and I can't remember the name of it now, but they're using some other base library to build that tool set off of. But they're essentially having to develop their own on top of that is my understanding of it. And I know that's pretty vague, but that's the best I know. Okay, so I realized the area of my leg and why it wasn't working. Okay, so here's the file that I was using. Actually, this time it's up, but it's just going. So, show you guys this one. Doing this one. Allows me to open it up here. So yesterday I was doing that, and then I was doing up with this kind of talk that I alright, so here's the so let's just try to read the file. All the read files, and we've got the CF files as well. So we've got our program.cs and startup. So everything that set of breakpoints that was the gist of what I found out. Yeah, you can definitely go okay, so that's the gist of debugging that I wanted to do. So,
I saw the questions right. So like in with JavaScript, we have source maps. So we like minify our JavaScript, and we have that, and then we have a source map that makes it where we can set breakpoints and see the code as we originally wrote it instead of this compressed minified version. I'm just wondering if they're doing something like this here. Like maybe you're actually debugging the WebAssembly, but there's something like a source map so you can see your C# source.
Yeah, let's have a quick look at that. See, the third project template. Oh, so the question was, oh no, well you got it recorded, I guess, right? So all right, less work for me. We'll have a look at that. We'll see if we can see it really quick in this version, because in this version of the client it should be as well. So again, this ASP.NET Core Hosted. Now you'll notice there's no option for authentication here. There are authentication capabilities, but you're gonna have to go through some third-party media servers and extension routes for the client-side project. So we're gonna check this ASP.NET Core Hosted. We're gonna click Create. Okay, so kind of similar to what you had seen before is you had essentially this client project that just omitted the client, but it was essentially the same, right? You had your Razor components, you had some of your C# classes that ran in conjunction with those, and everything needed for the client. So this client project is what gets compiled and pulled down to the server. Oh no, I just died. I have one on my computer. You want to grab it? Did anybody see a warning, a battery warning pop up? I did not see a battery warning. Totally forgot. Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Actually, one POC that I'm really interested in pursuing with it, something that I'm going to pursue, hopefully with my team with Jason. We're going to, I would like to kind of use the Blazor framework for, now we're in healthcare, so it's kind of hard to think of some scenarios, but I would like to use it for like a customer service tool, to get that really interactive and being able to like talk and get some real-time information from the users like calling in, kind of know where they're at. I don't know if you guys are familiar with things like you're ever working with Crutchfield. They're kind of my inspiration, but if you haven't, they're aftermarket stereo company that come back from, but their customer service to me is phenomenal, and they do some really cool things that just can less me as a customer. So we never put a lot of focus on our customer service area, and I think using this technology is really kind of opening up some areas where you can get that real-time interaction for the customer service rep, because it's internal, so we have a little more flexibility. This is a public-facing app where we have to work with some of that healthcare. Does that answer your question? I talked pretty fast.
Yeah, it does. And I know you mentioned about, the appearance of it, but it looks like it's just HTML, when you're composing that. So I'm sure you could just put CSS classes and things like that as normal, right?
Yeah.
So you could just style it the way we do any other web app.
Yeah, absolutely. And like, for instance, being UI on our company or new member in our company, right? So I still think there's some ways where what I like is the interoperability with JavaScript. You're not going to be forced to just cut right. Like, you can't just draw a line in the sand, right? That's almost impossible for a lot of companies. So I feel like with that interoperability and the capabilities behind Blazor, you can still kind of have some play there where things can play well with each other. So you can start doing some phasing of others, or you can run them side by side, parallel. So there's some flexibility in some design. This is not, as I said earlier, Angular and JS aren't going away anytime soon. Or Angular, React, or any of those FBAs aren't going away anytime soon. So companies, employees, developers are going to have to find a way that they can use these tools in their workflow to solve certain problems in workflow. But the styling, yes, you can totally style this up. This can be totally beautified on like the next project we're about to look at, but you can totally do that. All right, sorry about that, guys. I really apologize. Okay, so I have to log into my VPN real quick to get internet access. So this is going to be quick.
So Gibson,
Yeah.
with a lot of JavaScript frameworks, there's a lot of third-party testing frameworks that are out there. Is there any support, whether through Microsoft or through third parties, for testing frameworks for Blazor?
I'm not entirely sure from the testing avenue. I do know there's a lot of third-party integrations, and I would say yes, especially with the server side. I would believe so, but for the client-side version, I'm not sure what those would be, but I wouldn't be surprised if there were. And we could look at that GitHub repo. There might have some on that list. All right, so. Oops.
Hey, I'll give a shout out while you're getting set up. You showed that list earlier, the awesome list.
Yeah.
If you guys haven't seen that, like at the top of every one of those, there's a link, and there's an awesome list of awesome lists, and they have lists for everything, and it's just like the coolest stuff for that topic. A lot of it's IT related, but even like UX, just all like there's an awesome list for PowerShell. There's just pretty much almost anything you could think of around computers. Like if you're into something, check out the awesome lists.
Okay, thanks. I told you guys this was my first time. All right, we're waiting. Okay, so we looked at the client. We have this server project here. This is what will host all the files. And this, actually no, this is the one that gets compiled and pulled down. So this will actually become your runtime project. And then we have this shared project, which is just, you can see right now the weather forecast class is in here, but this is just essentially what that is in the shared library, that you can abstract some of those the business layer or the data objects and whatnot into this class that doesn't need to be pulled down. All right, so for the sake of time, we're going to just skip over. Wait, was there something I said I was going to show in this? It's going to run. You wanted to see if there was any kind of mapping. So let's just do a quick run of this. Oh, actually, too, yeah. So while this one's coming up, I may have gotten in something mixed up between this project and the other one. Loading, loading, loading. All right, it's loading. There we go. Okay, so if we look at this project, now I want to prove if I was mistaken earlier. Okay, so yeah, so you'll see here we still have the ability, this is a client-side app that gets pulled in. If we look at the network tab, if we refresh, did I refresh? Oh, wrong area. Okay, so let's go back here, hide my console. So you'll see it still pulled down all these DLLs in assembly. So if we go look at the JS, I believe what you're referring to is possibly in one of these. So here's the mono.js file. This has a bunch of configuration stuff in it, but I haven't looked at it too close, so I don't know if it would be specifically in this one or